at the outset, I'm very pro integration, especially from a kind of African perspective. I think pretty much all of the pre-integration studies have shown that there will be a net benefit to the continent as a whole. Obviously, within that, you will need to provide more support to certain countries in order to help them kind of tap into the benefits from integration. But I think overall there are some strong benefits to integration for the African continent. In terms of the AFCFTA and where we are, as with all integration initiatives, progress can often seem slow. But I think it's, from an African perspective, important to recognize that there has been significant achievement in the last, let's call it 10 years. Despite the fact that the AFCFTA was officially announced in 2018, there had been a lot of initiatives prior to 2018 in order to get to where we are today. And so I think taking a longer term view around this is important. The most prominent example that we have for anything similar is the EU. And the EU initiative is a decades-long, multi-decade initiative. And so recognizing that even though progress is slow, there is progress is an important thing to do. And I think it's important to also recognize that there are multiple different interests, different stakeholders. We have on the continent 54 countries that are expected to negotiate around the African continent free trade area. And so it is important to recognize that these can be lengthy processes. Having said that, in terms of where we are currently, so the AFCFTA, I guess, is the first part of building towards the broader 2063 agenda, which looks at a kind of holistic union across all African countries for the African continent as a whole. So this is, I guess, to some extent, the first of multiple steps towards achieving that kind of overall goal by 2063. The AFCFTA itself, there's multiple phases in terms of the negotiations. So phase 1 and 2, and then later on phase 3, which has been added, will ultimately define what type of integration we achieve under the AFCFTA. In terms of the phase 1 of the negotiations, it's focused on trading goods and services. The most kind of well-known of these issues is around trading goods, because I think it's the easiest to kind of convey in terms of the practicalities around it. In terms of the trading goods, what the AFCFTA is aiming to achieve is reducing your kind of customs duties and making it easier to trade across borders at a low cost. Where we are in terms of that is the AFCFTA became operational, I think it was in January 2021, from a trading goods perspective, but actually there is no trading goods taking place under the AFCFTA free trade area, as it were, currently. The reason for that is, even though the AFCFTA is in force and in place, there are still tariff negotiations taking place. And so to date, I think roughly 30 countries in Africa have submitted tariff schedules, either as a trading bloc, so such as ECOWAS, EAC, CEMAC, or as individual countries. But there are still quite a few countries that have not yet submitted their tariff schedules, or have submitted their tariff schedules, but which there is still a process to ensure that those tariff schedules are aligned with the requirements. And so currently there is no trade taking place, but it is hoped that the tariff schedule process will be finalized within the next year. I think my perspective from a realistic look at things is that we are looking at probably another year or so before trade can actually fully take place under the AFCFTA. The other kind of key issue that often hampers the implementation of these free trade agreements is around the rules of origin. My understanding is that the rules of origin process has largely been finalized, and I think there is a manual for rules of origin in place, and so that kind of stumbling block has been hurdled and shouldn't be an issue going forward. The other kind of key area under phase 1 of negotiations is around trade and services. The trade and services negotiations will ultimately, hopefully, lead to making it easier for business people and for firms to let's call it establish across borders and to invest across borders and then also to operate across borders. And so that is really the key area of trade and services that is being looked at under the AFCFTA. In terms of the phase two of the negotiations, that is really focused on what they call new era issues. So looking at kind of areas such as intellectual property rights, investment policy, competition policy, and really the aim there will be to align policies and regulations across countries to a kind of standardized uniform approach that all countries should have as a minimum level of operation. Those negotiations have not started yet. And I think there is an expectation that there may be a bit of delay to the start of those negotiations. Then the last aspect, which was a kind of add-on in terms of the phases of negotiations, is around e-commerce. Given the kind of strong growth in e-commerce, in digital trade, it was felt that it was important to include that as kind of a negotiating basis for the AFCFTA. That's effectively phase three of the negotiations. Again, yet to commence, but the hope is that there will be kind of a uniform approach to how countries adopt policies and regulations to e-commerce. Then maybe just the final thing on the AFCFTA, which I think I started mentioning, but I think it's probably important to affirm, is that progress is there but slow, and the requirements for integrating 54 countries across Africa. I say 54, even though we have 55 African Union members, because there is often a dispute around the status of Western Sahara. So I'm going to stick to 54 countries just to be politically correct. The integration requirements for 54 countries is onerous, and so I think we shouldn't be disheartened by the fact that progress is slower than everyone might otherwise want. I think we've made strong progress over the last 5 years since the establishment officially of the AFCFTA.